Welcome, everyone, to another exciting adventure on Riding Through the Unknown. I have tonight with me a very special guest who we were talking about earlier, has actually made an appearance on not only every season of my show so far, but was also the very first guest who inspired me to keep going with the show. And I almost think it's fitting, Brad, that we're having this episode on Guy Hawk's Day. Remember the 5th of November.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me on. It's an honor and a privilege to have been on all 3 seasons of your show on Guy Fawkes Day. Yeah.
And we've even met at conference, and so it's been an amazing journey so far.
Indeed, for sure.
So what has been going on in the world of Brad Olsen?
Well, as we just said in the setup, I've just completed my 11th book called Secrets of Antarctica, The Untold History of the Ice Continent. Took me 3 years to get this one done, but it's great. I think it's really among my best books ever. Shed some new light on the frozen continent and never before seen in the Western world maps of the underside of the ice in Antarctica that were used by the U-boat captains in World War II. Actually, Robert Seffer just came out with a video about the Vril women, and he did have some images of it. So he actually beat me by a matter of a week or two when his video came out showing these maps, because it's the smoking gun, Michael. It really changes everything, because it shows that there is an entire landscape world under the ice there. And we don't even have to talk about hollow earth necessarily, because the polar plateau of Antarctica is 2 miles thick. And there's the book. Just put it up on Google Play yesterday. I think the release date is going to be 11/11, but it is available for pre-order now, and it's a great book. You're going to love it. I will send you a copy of it.
I love the cover. The cover is like really engaging, actually.
Yeah, so this is our reconstruction of the Battle of High Jump, also called the Battle of Antarctica, which took place in February 1947 against the U.S. Armada of ships led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Now, it wasn't just Americans. There were Canadians. There were also Brits and Australians involved. And the reason for that is it was the quickest they could put together an invasion force. And the only thing that Byrd said before Operation High Jump is that it was military in nature. So they go down there with this huge armada of ships. It breaks off into 3 groups. There was a central group, there was an eastern group, and a western group. And the eastern and western converged right on the area known as New Schwabenland. And I have maps of New Schwabenland and where they charted that out, as well as this route that was used underneath the ice. But this cover shows what happened that fateful day when these UFO flying shaped craft, and there are eyewitness testimony in the book of this happening, as well as Russian Soviet intel about Operation High Jump that was also pretty newly released to the Western world. And this depicts these UFOs coming up out of the ice and also up out of the water and confronting the main armada of ships. And they could have easily taken out all of them. They did take out just about all the planes that were fighting back. They had some kind of force field around them that wouldn't allow our guns to penetrate. So it's a very one-sided battle. And by the way, Operation High Jump is still classified to this day. You can't even do a Freedom of Information to find out what really happened. So something really happened, and it was this battle that took place. It was over within 20 or 30 minutes. It was pretty one-sided, very quick, and then it sent the Allied forces packing 2 months into the 6-month expedition. So it was meant to go even the better part of the year, but well into 1947. But in February, right after the Battle of Antarctica, they turned around and left immediately. And Admiral Byrd made the very curious statement when coming back through Chile to El Mercurio newspaper, quoted him as saying that we would be confronted with an enemy that can fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. And then when he gets back to the U.S., he was read the Riot Act, put in quarantine, debriefed for quite a bit of time, and had to basically tell them we didn't defeat the Germans in World War II. They just relocated down here. Because did you know that not the Third Reich did not surrender, nor did the SS, the Waffen SS, the elite corps of the German fighting forces. Only the Wehrmacht, the army, the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, and the Kriegsmarine surrendered at VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, in May 1945. All the rest, all the money, including Martin Bormann, the money man, he kept popping up all over South America in the 1950s, and they took all the gold and all the loot out of there and started these investing in companies that already existed or creating shell companies, moving a lot of money around. And it's a very good chance that Hitler himself evaded death and just a doppelganger was killed. And he too lived out his life in South America. But I do believe they made a visit to the base or bases or colonies in Antarctica. Maybe on the front end before they went to South America.
I just thought of something interesting in my head. Is they all viewed themselves as the Aryan race, which starts with an A. They went to Antarctica, which starts with an A. They hid out in Argentina, which starts with an A. I wonder if there's a connection there.
Hey, I got one more for you, and I saw it in your the setup about Agartha. Some of the maps, including the very specific directions. You know how Germans are; they don't screw around with anything that is not exact how they want it. So there's written diving directions for the U-boats, and you'd follow these courses. You come up to a lake under the ice, you go down again, and then you pop up. And when you reach the lighthouse of Agartha, it's even written there. I reprinted it in my book in this classical writing of the Germans. They are meant to break out packet number 3. I've had this incredible research assistant that's helped me with this book, and we've not been able to locate packet number 3. But if it ever comes up, boy, would that be interesting, because it's how the staff of the U-boat, the commander, the captain, and the sailors, how they are meant to interact with the people of Agartha. So another A word for you there, Michael.
Indeed, and I also, with Admiral Byrd wanting to warn people about what's coming, I can't help thinking shortly after this, is that not in the timeline when War of the Worlds came out, in which there was an alien invasion that we were unable to stop except for the disease, and then I found out there was a TV show that said, oh, they just went into hibernation. Now they can take over our bodies. But do you think that was Admiral Byrd trying to say, hey, this is what's coming? We need to prepare?
Well, I like your way of thinking, but that was pre-World War II, the War of the Worlds. And actually, I write about it in my book, Future Esoteric, because it's one of the reasons why they said the American people can't handle the truth. We got to keep this all covered up as far as releasing information about ETs. And it was staged pre-World War II. So in the late 1930s, it was Orson Welles who read the script from an older novel by was it so Orson Welles, and then it was two Orsons. One was the author of that book was probably in the 1912 or something, and then the pretty sure War of the Worlds was Halloween, which was just a few days ago, 1938, I want to say, and people freaked out. And then the Brookings Institution did their report and said, "Look, we did this to show people, try to test them out, what they would do, how they would handle this kind of information." Obviously, they didn't handle it well.
Interestingly, it was written by H.G. Wells, who wrote The Time Machine.
Wells, and read by Orson Welles. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is interesting because he did The Time Machine too,
and Journey to the Center of the Earth. So you also had in your setup piece about the Hollow Earth, and I have a chapter on Hollow Earth in the book, that the entrance is at both of the poles. And this corresponds with other literature, namely the Smoky God, where they took a boat in the North Pole, entered into this hole in their boat. Apparently it's in the water, and then popped up underneath the ice in Antarctica some years later, a father and a son. So I quote an excerpt out of the Smoky God. That's a real fascinating story, where they met giants and the whole inner earth civilization.
You know, there are times that I wonder in literature when we read stories about how there was like a whirlpool where the ships would get sucked down. And I wonder sometimes, because they're only in certain areas that they write about them, are those actually gates to enter somewhere else? That's why, they only occur in certain areas. And we just naturally assume they're gone and lost due to the water crashing in. But could they have gone somewhere else, and that's what they're entering?
Right. Well, I like the way you're thinking, Michael, because that's occurred to me as well, that there would be multiple ways to come in, not just at the two poles. And I reproduce a map of Agartha in my book, Secrets of Antarctica, that shows this inner Earth hollowed out and some kind of inner sun. I still am kind of trying to wrap my head around how that works. But everything was opposite polar. That I found interesting. So just like in the Smoky God, when they got in there, their compasses were pointing to the southern pole, where they had just entered close to the North Pole. And then when they sailed through the oceans, apparently they interconnect, and you can do the whole world on the inside just as you can on the outside. When they got close to the South Pole, their needles were pointing to the North Pole. And that's really interesting because that's also depicted in these Tibetan diagrams of the inner Earth, which I also reproduce in the book, that show the poles being opposite, but also this inner Earth surrounding the core. But on that map of Agartha, they show they also show several cave systems that go through, and a couple examples are the around Sacsayhuaman in the South America, the Giza Plateau, the Tibetan Plateau, the Daros. If you're familiar with those, they're these inner creatures that live closer to Africa, South Africa, and there were in this map it shows all these cave systems that also go through. So it's really intriguing that there has been this long history of the inner earth or hollow earth, pretty much interchangeable, that has these high civilizations. So in the 1930s, the Nazis were sending all these expeditions to the Tibetan plateau, to Tibet and what is China and the Gobi Desert region, the high plateau where Tibet is. So you remember the movie 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt? Yeah, this was based on one of those expeditions, but they didn't talk about trying to find the entrance to inner Earth. But apparently the Nazis did, and there was a guy that led one of the expeditions named Ernst Schaefer. So he comes back in 1938, and the Nazis cannot put together their first trip to Antarctica soon enough. They waste no time and mount their expedition to New Schwabenland. And that's when they started setting up the base there, base 211. But then there was the larger of the two that was less military but more science-based, and that was called New Berlin. And that was a veritable city. And we think we've pinpointed it to close to being located near the South Pole. And the South Pole is also where there is this rumored giant hole in the ice. And that's why the NSA and the secrecy and the no-fly zone are in place, is to keep people away from it. And then that's the other entrance down under the ice, perhaps into the hollow earth, but certainly in the inner under ice realms. And so they're doing studies now, Michael, and I have several of them that I illustrate in the book, that where they're using that sonar scan, much similar to what they just did in Egypt to locate all the underground features on the Giza Plateau, doing it in Antarctica and finding it is a veritable world down there that even has different kinds of creatures and life forms and water flowing out. Because what people should understand is that Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world. So 14 known active volcanoes, but 93 geothermal features. So you have the propensity to create these very large under ice domes, which have flowing water and lakes and a whole ecosystem down there.
And what's interesting too about Antarctica is we all were taught growing up that it's a continent on the bottom of the planet that's always been an ice shelf. And they're now discovering that it was actually green at some point, and that there was a shift in the climate that froze it over. And I start to wonder, is it the climate that froze it over, or did ETs decide, hey, there's too many eyes now coming into our area, so they put like a holographic cloak, so to speak, over it so that we all would go, oh, nobody could live down there. Let's just focus over here where people could live.
Well, that would have been a long time ago, because the ice cap has been there for many thousands of years, certainly before our civilization rose up. But the very first group to transverse Antarctica to the South Pole, along with Roald Amundsen, who beat the Scott Party by 35 days, the race to the pole in 1913, But the Scott Party, they went past a location called Mount Buckley. It's above the Beardmore Glacier along their route. And they were finding fossils of ferns and animals and insects, proving what you just said, that at one point Antarctica had been a steaming jungle, and now it is a frozen landscape. So that could be, I would say, probably because of pole shift activity, that the continents have moved, continents drift, and Antarctica during the last pole shift would have positioned itself on the bottom of the planet where it is to this day.
And I'm also curious when we hear like in the early 1900s and the 1900s, a lot of expeditions to Antarctica, to the Arctic on the north side of the planet. And then all of a sudden it just stops. And nobody wants to go there anymore. And I highly doubt it's because we figured out everything that's going on there. But what is your opinion of why the rich are all wanting to go there, everybody's wanting to do an expedition, and then it just stops? Nobody ever says, let's do an expedition to the Arctic or Antarctica.
Well, I did. I went down there 7 years ago, and that
On a
was after
sailboat.
John Kerry. And so I went just a year or two later after all those elites went down there. And I think the most fascinating one was Prince Harry, the second son in the royal family in England. So he was in the armed forces, and he went down there with a bunch of his army buddies to cross country ski out of the South Pole. Well, the South Pole is just on the top of the polar plateau. There's nothing for hundreds of miles in all directions. So what the heck are you doing? Unless they got permission to go to the hole. And Brian S., the whistleblower that Linda Moulton Howe brought out about 10 years ago, I had the great opportunity of talking to him for about an hour doing the research on my book, and asked him the circumstances of his group was doing an emergency evacuation to the Davis base. And if you look on a map, and I haven't got his map reproduced in the book, that they were told to fly around the no-fly zone. It was always what you'd have to do as a pilot, but there was somebody's life in danger. And so they defied the no-fly zone, and they went over the air sampling station area, which is this huge area on one quadrant of Antarctica. And there they saw the hole in the ice. Everybody aboard saw it. They kept talking about it. And even when they were return flight, they said, let's go check it out one more time. And then somebody crackled over the radio and said, no, divert now. You are not to fly over there. But the damage was done, and they had already seen it. And this is what really struck me that was so interesting about it. He said that out of the South Pole, it's called the Amundsen Scott South Pole Research Station, there are cat tracks, just like you would see on a ski mountain that groom the trails. That's basically how they move most of the merchandise in Antarctica, are on cat tracks. And then snowmobile tracks leaving from the South Pole Station to this hole in the ice about 40, 50 miles away, certainly far enough that if you were at the base, you would never be able to see it. But that when there's a road that corkscrews down, that you can actually take ground transport, or in the case of Prince Harry, maybe they were cross-country skiing down it a ways. But it goes down. It's over 2 miles deep, the polar plateau there. So it could be done. And in Prince Harry, they're gone for about a week. So what the heck are you doing out there unless you're going to this place?
Exactly, because I don't see myself sitting staring at endless white for a
Right.
week and going, this is super relaxing.
Cold as hell too.
And so, do you think that the Arctic and Antarctic are actually connected somehow?
Well, that's if we can consider the hollow earth theory. Then there is entrances, large entrances, both in the north and the south. And then there's also cave entrances all around the world. But there would be an inner ocean as well, and that would be the connection. That's how the father and son said they sailed their boat in the book called The Smoky God, which is about 100 years old book, but it was quite a sensation. It was really largely responsible for a lot of people starting to think about the hollow earth. I think even H.G. Wells, when he did Journey to the Center of the Earth, probably read that book and was inspired by it. And it was written as nonfiction. It was written as their travel journal when they went through there. It's really a fascinating read. And like I said, I excerpt some parts of it in my book to just give the illustration of how these two did it. So to answer your question, if it is indeed true that there is this hollow earth or an inner earth with oceans that flow all the way through, then yeah, it would be possible to connect through the inside.
And talking about, Journey to the Center of the Earth, the one thing that's interesting that I don't think a lot of people pick up on is the very beginning of the movie when they start the expedition. They're starting it because they have a map. How do you have a map to something that's never been explored? So it's like, wait a minute, somebody had to go down there, map it, and come back.
Right. Just like, how do you get your packet for the Lighthouse of Agartha? And how do they know how to interact with the people down there? And they're very human-like, but much taller, very, very tall, way, way taller than the tallest humans. So they're human-like, but not quite human. So, in South America, you can go to museums where they have the elongated skulls with like a head that much bigger in the back, 30% larger cranial capacity in the skulls of those elongateds. And they've been found around the world, the Black Sea region, Europe, and Asia.
Egypt, too.
Yeah, and that's right, King Tutankhamun. I have a image when they did a scan of his body, when they CAT scanned him. He was an elongated. So is his uncle, King Akhenaten, and his wife Nefertiti, who wore that big head gasket. I mean, you could make the argument that's the reason why the pharaohs wore those headdresses, was to disguise their elongated skulls. And then, so that then begs the question, who are these elongated skulls? And in the Bible, it says that book of Genesis, in the very beginning, that that these men of renown came from the heavens down to earth, and they saw the women were fair and mated with them. So to me, that sounds like the Anunnaki are the space visitors who are also very tall with elongated heads, and the offspring were the Nephilim. So keep this in mind, that you can have two similar species that mate. For example, you can mate a horse and a donkey, and the end result is a mule. It's a little of each, right? Same thing with, I think, with humans and Anunnaki, that perhaps they could mate as well, and their offspring were the Nephilim. And there's a whole lot of weird stuff about the human genome, as well as our blood. Are you familiar with the Rh negative blood?
Right.
I have a chapter called the Blood of the Gods in my book, Modern Esoteric. And I actually come from an Rh negative blood type family, whereas my uncle, Douglas, the second son after my dad, who is Rh negative, as well as my grandmother. But she married a man with Rh positive blood type. And my uncle Douglas was born Rh positive blood. It was contaminated upon birth with my grandmother, and he died. Now, there's no other animal species that would do that, where a mother could kill her own offspring because of incompatible blood. So there's something about the human genome and our blood type that shows pretty specifically that we're at least two different species combined.
Absolutely. And, talking about the Bible, I always find it interesting how everybody blindly says Adam and Eve were the first two and only humans. And then they had Cain and Abel. But what did Cain and Abel do? They went and married women from other tribes. It's what it says. Who are these other tribes? Where did these other tribes come from? Because there's only supposed to be 4 humans on the planet. And everybody just says, oh, there was other tribes. And they just blindly go with it. But I'm like, wait, this doesn't add up. This story doesn't flow.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there you have it. There's so much about our history that just doesn't make any sense at all. And like the old saying, history is written by the winners. A lot of the historical documentation in my new book on Antarctica is about World War II and how we have not been privy to how advanced the Germans got and how they got that advanced. Where did they get their technology? And this goes all the way back to the Vril women 100 years ago in a Bavarian hunting lodge after World War I. And they were very telepathic, and they were actually communicating with advanced ETs from Aldebaran. And by doing so, after a while, they were able to recite blueprints for advanced technology, such as free energy, such as zero-point energy craft, to the point where the German engineers, including Victor Schauenberger, said, this is actionable intelligence. We can work with this. We can take it from the drawing board to the engineering offices and start to manufacture this stuff, which they did. And that could be those crafts coming up out of the ice that are featured on the cover of my book.
Do you think the jet planes that Germany had in World War II were from the ETs? Because everybody's using prop engines, and then all of a sudden, Germany's like supposed to be this underdeveloped, not having a lot of resources, comes up with jet planes, and we're like, nobody can match them. And it's like, how did they make this leap and nobody had anything about it?
No. And, Werner von Braun, who was working on the V1 and the V2, he came over with Project Paperclip and started NASA. What do you know? As well as hundreds of Project Paperclip scientists and also people that were placed in government and business, as well as the psychiatrists who do MK Ultra experiments. Do you know that's a German spelling for MK, for mind control? Because in German, control is spelled Krontolle. And that's where that comes from. So we got the paperclip Nazis to thank for that. But to answer your question, yeah, there was nothing like the V1, the V2, and even the later disc-shaped craft, the Honeyboo craft was the V7. So they continued that process. But again, history does not tell us how advanced those Germans were and what happened to that technology after the war, which a lot of it, basically the Germans knew they were going to lose, but in 1943, about 2 years before the war actually concluded. So they had plenty of time to load up their U-boat submarines, some of which were could carry huge amounts of cargo, and others were the Führer's convoy. I actually have some passports. Frank DeComner, the research assistant on this book, came up with, and he said they're authentic. We reproduced the passports to New Schwabenland, to New Berlin, and the officers on the Führer's convoy says on their passports. So they were moving stuff out of there down to New Schwabenland pre-war. I mean, the convoys of ships and U-boats pretty much kept going all through the war years, and certainly at the end of the war, Germany was producing more submarines in 1945 than in the entirety of World War II. And of course, the war was over in May. So then, and there are over 100 U-boats that have never, ever been discovered where they were, right? So they're bringing stuff down, they're bringing personnel, they're bringing equipment, and they're bringing the Honeyboot craft and the Vril craft, and perhaps even the mothership that they built. And I have the blueprints for the Aldebaran mothership that could have smaller craft and a medium Honeyboot craft within it. So they were very advanced. And if history were to tell the truth, you'll find that the Antarctica Germans, who basically after the war, they dropped the Nazi. They don't like to be called that anymore. They're the Antarctica Germans. But they also started their own secret space program, which we know Penny Bradley was a part of, and others in the conference called Nachtwaffen, which is the Dark Fleet. And that was also inspired and backward engineered through reptilian craft, which the Germans allied themselves to during World War II. And just like we fell into the trap with the Greada Treaty, okay, you give us technology and then we'll let you abduct people and mutilate cattle and stuff like that in this country. Germans did the same thing and fell into that trap as well. It's not good to make treaties with malevolent ETs. But they did get the technology out of it, and that's that great leap in their technology, as well as downed craft. So the Germans had their own Roswell craft in the Black Forest in 1933. They recovered a craft, and of course it went right to their engineers who were backward engineering it. But Mussolini, he had even a better one, a nearly intact UFO that came down in the Lombardy region. He also let the German engineers have at it and start to deconstruct it. And that's what backward engineering is. You just basically take it apart, figure out how it works, put it back together, get it to work again, and then have your engineers manufacture those parts and make your own products.
So do you think that's why Italy and Germany allied themselves during the war? Because they always seem to be, like, on paper and in person, like, not a good mix, like, always, like, trying to up each other, not getting along. So do you think the alliance was really more of, we want your ET tech, so we'll say we're your ally as long as you give us this?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that had something to do with it, but they needed an ally. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the Vatican was fully behind the Third Reich. There's pictures of Hitler shaking hands with the Pope. And then after the war, the Vatican helped establish the rat lines to get all the Nazi officers out of Germany, and then with new passports with new names and relocate them to South America countries and elsewhere. And that's the Fourth Reich. And I write about this in the new book too, that the Germans, they really didn't lose World War II. They just had to go underground after they lost their fighting forces and became more of an intelligence force. And then why do you think the Allies and NATO were always sword rattling with the Soviet bloc, the Minsk Accord, and the group there? Because they were being provoked by the Fourth Reich, who wanted us to fight each other. And this has gone on to this very day. And I think it's a very good chance that the Fourth Reich is still very active, but in an underground kind of way. There's also, I put this in the book, there's a building in New York City with you need a key to get in the elevator, and it's unmarked. Don't know where you're going unless you have permission to go there. But there's actually an embassy for the Antarctica Germans in New York City, close to the UN building, where, of course, the United Nations is located in New York City. So they've been able to keep themselves under wraps, and mainly because of technology once again. So after the Battle of High Jump, it told our generals, these guys are way advanced. We don't stand a chance fighting these UFOs. And then, so you remember in 1952, the overflight of the Capitol with about a dozen crafts that flew in. I've got the headlines in the book. It happened 4 days later. They came back. And so Laura Eisenhower, great granddaughter of Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the president-elect in 1952, but not president yet. It was still Truman. In her book, Awakening the Truth Frequency by Laura Eisenhower, she has evidence that overflight was a surrender, that we actually capitulated to the Antarctica Germans. And that actually makes a lot of sense. Because after High Jump, we knew that they had the technology. They could fly over the Pentagon and the Capitol and the White House, and we couldn't even shoot them down, just like in High Jump. And so we had the numbers and the force, but they had the technology. And so it was striking a deal with them that, look, everybody's interest is to keep this whole thing secret. They don't want to be known, because if the rest of the world found out that there's still Germans in bases in Antarctica, and I've got some headline newspapers from 1941 of the German headquarters that they were located down there, that they were already starting to move their stuff down there, but we couldn't dislodge them. So we, again, wanted to buy time. Maybe we'll get a chance. And then so in 1958 was Operation Argus, Argus. That too, still classified, still top secret operation. Ostensibly, they were going down there to test nuclear warheads. But why were they right off the coast of New Schwabenland to do it? Why did they have to go so far south? So myself and others, researchers, think that they actually nuked them, that this was retribution for High Jump. And right after that happened, then you have the Antarctica Treaty start to be formulated. And one of the very first clauses is you will never be able to use or test nuclear weapons in Antarctica, as per the Antarctica Treaty, which is still holding to this day. So that gave the Antarctica Germans their cover to basically continue their operations. And here we are today.
I can't help wonder why they used New Schwabenland. Was, like you said, they had force fields around their craft. So they were like, can a nuke penetrate that shielding? And they were trying to see maybe if they could finally, like you're saying, turn the tables and be like, we now have the ability to strike at you. Now we're coming to a different accord.
Yeah, good point. And also, there's 2 miles of ice. So even if they were dead on the target, but the New Berlin base is under the ice 2 miles below, I don't think it would have much effect. So in the event I'm able to go back down there, and I'm actually working with a venture capital company called VC Cross, and they're trying to raise funds. And I go back down there. I know where to go. I have the itinerary. Go down there with a film crew and do a documentary. And one of the places I'd go is New Schwabenland, or the area that was known that. It's Queen Maud Land on globes. That one thing I would do is bring some Geiger counters, because if we could determine that it got hit by a nuke, that's huge. That's big news.
It is, and I will just say, do us all a favor and don't use the sailboat this time.
Yeah, I threw up quite violently. No, we're flying in next time. And you can. There are places you can go in Antarctica. See, this is kind of a misconception. Where we went, it's kind of the tourist area on the Palmer Peninsula. But I was there on a sailboat, 14 of us, for about a month. But there are other areas you can fly in. And I've talked to a group that organizes trips. It's expensive, but you can do it. You can fly to the South Pole. You can climb the Vinson Massif, the tallest mountain in Antarctica. And there are other places you can go. But, and this is what Brian S. and Linda Moulton Howe told me, and I totally agree, you have to get permission from the National Science Foundation, which ostensibly is controlled by the NSA, National Security Agency. But remember, for a long time, the NSA was no such agency, because they didn't even admit they existed. But they were formed also around the time of the CIA, right after Roswell, to hide everything extraterrestrial. That's why the NSA was formed. So it's no wonder that they've been seen and spotted at the South Pole Station.
Yeah.
They also have an unmarked building at McMurdo Base. It's like Area 51, the big secret that everybody knows about. So the place is crawling with intelligence agents, and it just begs a question: what are they doing down there, unless they have some kind of big core secret to hide?
Right, and we also had that base in Greenland that we abandoned because they were like, we can't keep the ice permanent for the missile base. And I'm thinking, you have a city under the ice, you're building in the ice, and we have bases all over the world. I feel confident if they really wanted to, that base would be in existence today. I think it's because somehow the story linked in Camp Century, I believe it was called, had to be shut down because it was no longer secret. So they made a big showing of moving out. But I often wonder, did they really move out, or did they just move the surface out and left the actual base still active?
Yeah, that's a good point. Did you know that that Thule base at the northern part of Greenland, that was originally a German base? They too were colonizing the Arctic region as well as the Antarctic region. They pulled out after World War II, and then it's administered by Denmark. The whole of Greenland is, but it's been a very strategic military base, and that too has never quite gone away.
Yeah. And I have a question for you about Antarctica, but it's more from a TV show point of view, and that is the Stargate SG-1 series. They showed Antarctica being a place where a Stargate was buried in the ice, and that there was an outpost there for the ancients, as they called them, which we could call the Anunnaki. And that outpost was like a protection base for the planet. Do you think that that really is there? Or do you think something else is there and they were trying to make us distracted by saying, oh, look, there's a base here to protect us, when it's something else?
Right. Well, you know, the old saying, art imitates life, or life imitates art. That there's a fine line between what Hollywood represents and the reality of it all. I like the quote at the beginning of the very first Alien movie, when they're waking up out of hibernation and the reason they have to wake up is because they're going to go investigate this planet where they're getting some kind of signal coming from it, and their ship was nearby. But they said when they're waking up, hey, we're getting a call from mission control in Antarctica. So even in the future, they're portraying it. But I'm not sure the episode you're talking about, but in our free will world that we live in, that we all have the free will to make our choice, you can't just spring this stuff without any clues or any pre-knowledge. You have to do it through Hollywood and movies and TV and music, because that will then be the justification. Look, we told them in Stargate, we told them in Alien that they're this mission control down in Antarctica. That way, when they go ahead and do it, it's the revelation of the method that they say, hey, we tried to tell them. We did tell them in our movies and stuff. If people don't listen, that's their fault. And it's a form of mocking the victim. I get into this really deep in my Esoteric series of books, especially in Beyond Esoteric, where we are basically having our free will hijacked because they're using movies and other media sources to basically say, hey, we told you, but you didn't listen. So now it's on you.
And one of the things I like to point out is in the golden age of television, when it was first starting out, you had like the Donna Reed show, or you had shows. Then all of a suddenly, one day after the CIA's in operation, it becomes, oh, you need to watch this program on TV. And the whole lingo of television went from watching shows to watching programs. And everybody just was like, oh, great, we're getting this new program on. How great is that? And didn't realize they're talking about programming this, not a program like you're getting to read, like you would read from a play.
Exactly. Tell, lie, vision. You can tell your lies with vision, that you see those lies. So, yeah, they're telling us without telling us, or in veiled such ways that we're being programmed. And they're even telling you they're called programs, mind control programs.
So I'm curious with your thoughts of, as we're having like Hollywood is, I believe, being disassembled because of all the corruption and everything going on there, that it seems to be falling. But other studios are kind of picking up where they left off, but they're showing a different type of program or movie. So, do you think the white hats have gotten involved in the Hollywood, and there's like two Hollywoods? There's the white hat side that's saying, look, this is what's really going on. Wake up. And the other side that's going, hey, we're still programming you. Just, keep your eyes closed and just, be okay.
Yeah, I definitely think there's two sides. But I'd say the white hats are more operating on the alternative media, because mainstream news, especially, is dying on the vine. Nobody watches it anymore. We all know it's fake news. So we're having much more effective communication on alternative media channels. So whether you know it or not, Michael, you're actually part of the solution, helping people understand these thorny topics that need to be constructed in the alternative media.
Well, I'm happy to play my little part.
Yes, you do.
And thank you for, playing the part that you play. And one of the things that I'm kind of curious too, that you talk a little bit about, because I've seen some presentations, places like Newgrange, where
Yeah.
it aligns with the sun and it's like a calendar in the ground. But I wonder, because of the way it's built and the way that it's located, do you think that it really is an astro calendar, or could it be like a temple or a home that the giants use that was left behind and we just go, "Oh, look, the sun is there. Astro calendar. Okay, we solved it."
Right, right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I did a whole series of books on sacred places, and indeed, there are so many around the world that have these astroastronomy and archaeoastronomy features. That is, in the case of Newgrange, you have this Neolithic stone constructed temple that has this passageway that goes deep into it, covered over with earth, but an inside cave like structure that was created. And at the very end of it are these triple spirals carved onto a stone that only on the winter solstice does the sun shine all the way through on the couple days before and a couple days after. So that couldn't have been coincidence. It had to have been the planned into the entire structure of Newgrange.
And also, I'm not sure, how much you know about the Nazca lines, but when I was talking with Barbara Lamb about them, she pointed out that in Chile, I believe it was, there's a trident glyph that points right to Nazca. And I was like, I've never heard of the trident glyph. And found that really interesting that they would have a glyph that points to the lines that's so far away that, what would be the purpose of that? And I was like thinking, could it be like we use landmarks to point, for directions? Could a ship coming in go, oh, look, there's the trident. Okay, turn here, and on this course heading, we'll hit Nazca. But it's like, how has nobody ever heard of this trident?
Yeah, there are other geoglyphs in South America outside of the Nazca area in Peru, which is the highest concentration of these geoglyphs, but there are other ones. Yeah. And yeah, I've not heard of that trident. I want to look into that. But the Nazca lines are just totally fascinating that you really need to be up above them to make them out to understand what the shape and figures are.
Yeah, and we can't replicate that today. And as much as advanced as we say we are, there's so many things around our planet we can't do that the ancients did. So I wonder, have we really progressed or have we regressed?
Yeah, good point. I'd say it's up to debate. Are we evolving or are we de-evolving? Right.
Yeah. So what do you have coming up? Anything that you want to promote aside from your book that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I got a couple conferences rounding out the year. In fact, I'll be flying out to the UK for Miles Johnston's Basis Project conference in the middle of December. And I'm going to meet up with Hugh Newman and J.J. Ainsworth, some friends of mine who do a lot of megalithic work and studies. And we're going to go to Avebury and hopefully Glastonbury and Stonehenge. And then I come back and I speak in Menlo Park, California, kind of a more of a private group that they're having me back for the third year in a row. And then I got a whole bunch of conferences that are stacking up in 2026, including I'm going to Germany, where I will meet with my research assistant, Frank, and he's going to co-present with me on our research of these maps and U-boat instructions under the map and a whole bunch of other stuff. And also I'm speaking at the Bosnian Pyramid Conference in June. So at least 3 overseas trips for conferences in the coming months. And all that information, the links and conference information can be found on my website, bradolsen.com, just as my name spelled. And go to the conference link and you'll see where my upcoming talks are going to be at. Hopefully like the one in Orlando or in St. Pete. So I'll be able to meet up with you again sometime, Michael. It's great to meet
That
you.
would be really cool. And
yeah.
if you have time, I have another question for you. Because since you mentioned Avebury and Glastonbury, there's talks that that is the Avalon of the Arthurian lore, and I use that over legend because I think we've proven Arthur's been around. We just haven't really proven when, but we know he did exist. So, do you think Glastonbury and that area is the Avalon of lore? And do you think it has a connection to the stars?
Yeah, I've seen the zodiac around Glastonbury. It's pretty fascinating. That's why I'd love to go there and check it out. It's hard to say, legend or factuality. No, nobody believed that the ancient city of Troy was real until Schielman, a German archaeologist, found it in the 19th century. They thought everything that was written about in Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey was just all make believe, but then turned out to be true. So maybe there'll still be something that will connect Glastonbury to King Arthur. I'd like to think so. It's a great story, and maybe the truth is out there, Michael. We'll still find it.
Yes, and so I'm sure you have a lot to do, so I will wrap up with simply saying from my show and myself to you, Brad, thank you for everything you're doing to awaken humanity.
Well, thank you, Michael. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And thanks for having me on again. And thank you for all that you do to awaken humanity. I mean, this is a team effort. We're the ground crew down here. We're all doing what we do in our various ways to help elevate the human race. The Great Awakening is upon us.
It is. And if you want to catch Brad, he may appear next season. You never know. So if you want to keep following along and subscribe to the channel, because you never know when Brad's going to make an appearance.
It'll happen again. And then also people can go to cccpublishing.com. That's our publishing website where all my books are. And if you get one of my books off cccpublishing.com, then you can get a signed copy. But we also have Laura Eisenhower's book, Awakening the Truth Frequency, is there, and Michael Jaco, Leon Lyons Zagami, a whole bunch of other authors at cccpublishing.com. So check that out and get your signed copy. Get it right out.
You have a lot of great disclosure through your publishing. I am so impressed with all the books that are available there and topics.
Well, thank you, Michael. Yeah, and have your listeners and viewers check it out too.
Yes, the links are for everything we've been talking about are in the description. And do go and check out his new book. It is, you can pre-order it, I believe, until the 11th when it comes out. But it is, I can say, every book that I've read of his has been mind-blowing and so cool to read. So you definitely don't want to miss out on this book.
Thank you, Michael. Yep. And then physical copies ship at the end of the year on New Year's Eve. We'll have the physical copy.
Very cool.
Antarctica. Yep.
So thank you to our guest and thank you to everybody who is watching and was chatting in the chat room. And thank you all for coming in at an early hour. I know it's not our usual time, but you know, when you have such an esteemed guest, you have to make some exceptions. No, I'm kidding. He's a great guest, and we like to kid around, but I'm grateful we were able to make this work. And so thank you, and blessings to you, Brad, and all your adventures and your new place that you got going on.
Thank you.
So with that, we are going to say goodnight, everybody.
Thanks, Michael. Have a good night.
Have a good night, Brad.